Hey everybody, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Zero, and in today's review, I'm going to be talking about the third studio album by PVRIS, a pretty genre-bending act from Lowell, Massachusetts, who really rose to fame with their debut studio album White Noise in 2014. This album is called Use Me, and it was just released 2 days ago on Warner Records. PVRIS have gone through a pretty rough lineup change in their career, the most recent and controversial one being the departure of guitarist Alex Babinski just a few days after he had some sexual misconduct allegations made against him, and 2 days before the release of the album. Since then, the band has mainly just consisted of lead singer Lynn Gunn and bassist/keyboardist Brian McDonald, but it really only feels like Lynn is doing most of the work and is the only one in the band, which is one of my biggest gripes with this album. That's not to say that it's so incredibly hard to tell that some of the work is also being done by Brian and Alex, but there are a lot of songs on this album where it's pretty hard to tell that they are, and most of these songs ended up being my least favorites on this album. Not just because of that reason in particular, but also a few more which I will get into very shortly. Diving into the deep end of genres like synth pop, dance, and even some EDM thrown into the mix, it's pretty easy to say and tell that this is PVRIS' most upbeat and fun, yet also their most different and uncommon album to date. Now, to say that's always a good thing would definitely be an overstatement, but there are some fun songs on this album that mostly make those sounds work well, and I would definitely see myself coming back to some of these tracks in that case. In fact, one of this album's key elements is how evenly it's divided in terms of tone and mood. The first half of the album is mostly dancey and upbeat tracks, utilizing a lot of different sounds and instruments like synths and heavy bass and keys, especially in tracks like Gimme A Minute and Dead Weight and even Stay Gold. Whereas the second half of the album is mostly somber and mellow tracks that feel pretty appropriate for rainy days and romance movie soundtracks and are just mostly more rawly produced in the first half of the album. And like I said before, some of these work really well, but others not so much. Even this album's pretty present feelings of vulnerability and sadness and despair can't save some of these tracks that feel really bland and uninspired. One of the tracks that I would find myself coming back to a lot is Old Wounds, a pretty rawly straightforward and vulnerable track that could mean a lot of different things. I'm sure most people who have heard the song get the vibe that it's about missing an old lover, and that's fair to think. However, the vibe I get from it is maybe that Lynn didn't get her heart broken from a lover, but maybe somebody else that wronged her in life, whether it was a trusted friend or a parent, or somebody she just ultimately felt really close to. You can really feel how betrayed and lied to Lynn feels in this song. However, you really could just listen to the first part of this track and get everything you need to out of it, as the rest of the song is pretty repetitive in terms of its lyrics, and that kind of sucks because I would have loved to hear Lynn talk more about her struggles and sadness without using the same lyrics over and over. But the song is sad and vulnerable and relatable, which is why it stands as my favorite track on this album, and maybe even my favorite track PVRIS has ever put out so far. Even this song's sound and instrumental help back up its sadness. We're given those pretty somber and reverbed keys and distant guitars that really add to the song's feeling, and they just back up Lynn's vocals so well. However, besides that one song, most of the tracks I listed as my favorites down in the description are mainly just because they were the only ones that sounded a little bit better than my least favorites. I had a lot of trouble vibing with most of these tracks for the sole purpose of just how messy and weird and forced some of them sound. Wish You Well is a really boring closer for this album, and it is definitely easy to understand why it was saved as the last track of the album. In my opinion, this song tries a little too hard to be depressing and somber, to the point where it just feels incredibly boring and underwhelming. Closer tracks are usually supposed to have suspense and a huge climax, but I was just ultimately let down with this one. It just felt like bland, unseasoned pasta. Death of Me suffers from even more problems than that of Wish You Well. This song contains lyrics that we've heard 1,000 times from emo acts, such as lyrics like, "This love is a loaded gun," or something about a loaded gun, or "Chain me up and set me free," or "Set me free," something related to that, I don't know. And they just feel entirely too cliche to the point where it just feels dreadful hearing them throughout the first and second half of the track, because they're so predictable and you already know what Lynn is going to say, so why not just say them before she does, or just say them for her? This song's sound also makes it feel like Lynn was trying too hard to sound like Billie Eilish, but like a Walmart version of her. She utilizes Billie's whispery and high way of singing to inject some sort of emotion into the song and maybe some sort of inspiration, but she should just leave it to Billie to create that sort of emotion. I have to say that the first half of this album is worse than the second half. The first half of this album just sounds like predictable radio hits that try way too hard to sound like something different and unique, but then just ultimately end up being messy. Gimme A Minute isn't a horrible track, but it just feels like this weird mishmash of EDM, trap, and even some dubstep vibes thrown into the mix, but there's no way to tell which one that PVRIS was trying to go for. A lot of sounds are just thrown together solely for the purpose of trying to be hard-hitting and energetic, but the energy just feels messy and a little bit too weird. At least the second half tried to be something emotional and original. By that, I mean it seems like sometimes PVRIS are trying to get back to their original sounds to give listeners a sense of nostalgia, and sometimes they are just trying something completely new. I can appreciate that, but to sum this up, this album mostly just sets us up to let us down. I'm giving PVRIS' third studio album, Use Me, a 5.5 out of 10. Thank you guys so much for watching my review of PVRIS' third studio album, Use Me. This is actually the first album I've ever heard from PVRIS, so maybe I'll go back and listen to some of their other stuff, and maybe I'll review them if I end up liking them so much or hating them so much. Let me know what you guys thought of this review down below. Like the video, subscribe, comment some other stuff you want me to review in the future. But until the next review, my name is Zero, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.